I'm now going to continue my video series on Henry Ward Beecher and his sermons by discussing the curse of Exodus chapter 34, verse 7. Now, what is the curse of Exodus chapter 34, verse 7? Well, that's a situation in which a gentleman or a lady commits such an egregious sin that God not only punishes them, but he also punishes their family to the third and the fourth generation. Now, how does this work? Okay, let's take Achan, for instance. He went into Jericho, stole a Babylonian garment and some other items that God forbade him to steal. What was the end result? God ordered the Israelites to gather Achan, his wife, and his children, and his livestock, and they had one massive stoning party. End of story. Now that's one way God could perform this curse. Another way worked like the first king of Israel, Saul. Okay? I know a lot of people think that David was the first king of Israel. He was not. Saul was the first king of Israel. Saul committed such egregious sins that God said, look, you're going to lose your kingship, and on top of that, none of your descendants are going to be king of Israel. Now here's the thing. Had Saul's children been better behaved, they could have still held important positions in Israel. Just because they didn't hold kingship didn't mean that they couldn't have held important positions in Israel. It would be the modern equivalent of, let's say God said, well, because of the sins of your father, you will never be a reverend. But that's okay, because you can still hold a very important position in the church, and your children can do the same thing. So God may stop you from doing something, but he may allow you to do other things in place of that. You can still be very prosperous and not be a reverend. You can still be the ultimate servant of God and not be a reverend. So just because God prevents you from doing something doesn't mean that he'll prevent you from doing anything at all. See what I mean? Shoot, even Moses was not allowed to enter the land of Jerusalem. But he was allowed to see it. And he was buried not too far from it. See what I mean? So the curse doesn't have to be absolutely devastating to you. You may not be allowed to do certain things, but you'll be allowed to do other things to take that place. See what I mean? So God can still have a purpose for you, even if he doesn't allow you to do certain things here on this earth. There you go. Now, another way this curse can actually work is through books. And this is something I was talking about in a previous video entitled, It's Just a Book. Let's say your father or grandfather writes a horrific book. Okay? Well, it can become a curse to you because it can become a humiliation. Well, you're the grandkid of that guy who wrote that awful book. See what I mean? So people will still make fun of you and say, hey man, why did your grandfather have to write such a book? That was nasty. So you see? So the writings of your forefathers can actually haunt you. See what I mean? So that's another way the curse could work to the third and the fourth generation. Now, does that mean you can't prosper? Of course you can. It just means that you're being haunted by something that your forefather actually did. And this was kind of true with those in the South right after the Civil War. Okay? Even though those people after the third and fourth generation, they had never owned slaves or anything. Okay? They still felt a part of the curse because their forefathers did own slaves. Okay? They weren't guilty of anything, but because of what their forefathers did, they lived with a certain level of shame. Which is sad, but a lot of those people, despite that, ended up prospering anyway. Because like I said, God can give you a different avenue of prospering despite what your forefathers did. See what I mean? Hopefully you understood the illustration. If you didn't, I'll do a further clarification later on. But that's how the curse can work. Even if God denies you the ability to do certain things, that doesn't mean that God doesn't have a purpose for you. And that God can't lead you to different things which you can still prosper in the kingdom of heaven. So you may be living under one of God's curses, but at the same time you may end up prospering. God says, well, you can't be a priest, but maybe you're the best accountant of your church. Well, that's not too bad. God's saying, you still have a purpose with me. I can make you the best accountant of your church despite the fact you're not a priest. I may not let you hold some position, but you may hold a completely different position, and you can still serve me very, very well. See what I mean? So, even if a curse of God happens to visit you, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to ruin your whole life. That just means that God's found a different direction for you. And He allows you to prosper where He didn't allow your ancestor to prosper. Shoot, even take a look at Cain. Let's take Cain for another example. Despite the fact that God was punishing Cain, God said that if anybody else tried to punish Cain the way God was punishing Cain, God would punish them. So Cain still got to live a long life despite the fact that God punished him. See what I mean? And that's how that worked. Alright. Hopefully you understand that if God denies you something because of a curse, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't prosper somewhere else. God just has a different purpose for you. He can work around even His own curses. Now that's an awesome and mighty God. Alright, I will tell you more in a future video, so I want you to stay tuned.